Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to the Just My 3 Cents live interactive podcast where you can jump on and give us your 3 cents on race, sex, and culture. Dropped this thing out the air earlier this morning, last minute promotion. Typically try to rock at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night. Sometimes I have to do Thursday nights. So a little sporadic with the show. But the goal is to try to rock every week. So sometimes my schedule doesn't let me. But ultimately, just want to team up, have you jump on. It's an interactive podcast. I hope I don't do these shows just myself. I don't want it to be a full monologue of you just hearing what I have to say, even though the show is called Just My 3 Cents. The ultimate goal is for you, the intellectual outcast, as I call all of my listeners to the Mental Dialogue Talk Show, as well as to this show. We've been doing this for a few months now, trying to figure out the video game. So we've been a long-standing, for those that don't know, long-standing audio-only show via the internet every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so more so known for the Mental Dialogue Talk Show every Saturday. But jumping into the video podcast game has been a little different, and I got to figure out some of my marketing, but we've definitely had some very interesting shows. Last week's show was amazing, and what I've attempted to do to a degree is just, as I said, I've always wanted people to jump on, so more or less it's really like an open call. So I've been playing around with the formatting, so hopefully y'all enjoy some of the changes I'm going to make tonight just to play around with it, see how it works. And so, because I would like to, in a sense, jump on various topics. It could be something current, anything that you want to bring up. Again, I go by Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. We like to take the Socratic method. So jump on, ask questions, come in, give your viewpoints, and ask me questions about things that are happening. And so what I wanted to do before I get into the cusp of the show that I, in a sense, promoted very briefly. Again, just very brief promotions on, in a sense, courting versus dating. Before I jump into that, I wanted to do some quick hitters of things that have just been happen very recently in the kind of out there that I've seen this week over the course of social media, if you will. And I just wanted to touch and give a quick viewpoint on that. And hopefully more of y'all will get on when we get into the gist of the conversation, instead of me doing the gist of the conversation and people coming on later trying to figure out, okay, what is it that they were talking about? So these are, in a sense, just quick hitters. I'm going to share a couple posts that I've seen on social media, and they really are partly related to shows we've already done. So for those who may have seen a couple of weeks ago when we did the show, Gay Jokes, Off Limit or Not, I got a couple of things that, in a sense, build on that conversation. So that's one thing I love about doing the Just 3 Cents podcast. Sometimes we will do the show on Saturday, and we'll be talking about hard issues of race, sex, and culture, and maybe something doesn't get covered, so I'll turn around and cover it on this one. And so this thought that I saw by our friend Jack Ponte, I'm going to read this directly to y'all. So bear with me as I share this thought, because I think it's related to the show we did just a few weeks ago. Jack, again, a friend of mine by Jack says, I get the all-inclusive thing, but when it's too obvious, it's preposterous. I keep seeing ads on Twitter for women's workout pants, one very shaped fitness model and one overweight girl. Okay, I get it, respect it, but I'm not sure if that works as well as they want it to. Here we made pants in your size too. It might be inclusive, but it's also alienating and intimidating, because you really see the two body types in comparison, and you know that they made the size and ran the ad just to include you. Maybe running separate ads would make more sense and be more effective. This ad is meant to include, but it really says, see how hot she looks, especially next to you. This kind of thing runs the gamut and permeates everything lately, trying to create equality and inclusion when in fact, when the facts is that's a farce. I have friends ripped and shredded to the max. I'm not them, and it's okay knowing we are not equal in that category. I recognize and applaud their superiority in that realm, and I don't feel bad about myself. I think this whole we are including you now thing does more harm than good. Maybe the laser light needs to be dimmed a bit. The minute you know you are being included is the minute you know for sure you weren't equal. Maybe it's best off to focus on your own superior traits instead. I wanted to basically jump on that. Not only do I love this post, again, it's just a friend of mine, I came across it, but I want to relate it to the conversation we were having just a couple of weeks ago about, if you will, gay jokes off limits or not. And so as I hear this friend of mine, this brother, break down his concept of, can we be so inclusive that we're actually harming the culture? And so I'm not going to show you the picture, but it was just basically, I'll say when I looked at the picture, I saw exactly what he was saying. Like, it just didn't look great for marketing. Whereas, like, for example, different places, like different stores, are geared towards different audiences, right? As far as clothing. And so you, like, for example, they might be like a men's store that caters to 2X, 3X men or whatever, and they'll make that their marketing niche. And so if you were to go by that store, you wouldn't expect to see models that don't fit the store. And so by having those two, just kind of point out what he's saying, so to have these two models next to each other, it looked pretty ineffective, and I would agree with him. But the bigger point is where we've headed into society. And so we were having a dialogue a couple of weeks ago, again, referencing are gay jokes off limits or not. And we took that show a lot deeper because we started discussing the lack of discourse that we're able to have, because one, we don't teach critical thinking, if you will, in school anymore, even to the college level. And so with the lack of critical thinking, quite often now we don't have healthy discourse, whether in public or even amongst each other, and especially on social media. So what I highlighted in that show was that the lack of public discourse would lead to this ad that he's pointing out. And again, many will say, oh, I don't see any harm in it. But he's talking about the actual effect of the ad and how, as he said, it becomes a big farce. And I agree with that, because with the lack of public discourse, that's how we got to now. They're having to make laws, for example, at least in my opinion. If you disagree, please jump on. But now we're having to make laws to say we're not going to allow transgender men to compete against women. And what I talked about on that show, this is a quick hitter. What I talked about on that show was we've actually turned equality upside down, because to have a transgender woman, that's let me say it correctly, to have a transgender woman competing against women in swimming or whatever the sport might be. They've even competed in boxing and hurt women. Like that has happened in the last year or so. And so what I pointed out is we're pushing for equality, but you actually create unfairness just based on the fact that this person was born as a man. And so equality and unfairness don't go together. That should be simple dialogue if we could still have discourse. But because we kind of get into echo chambers, we kind of yell down and say, well, this is what equality looks like, and actually distort the actual word. So I agree with that, brother, when it comes to this, right? And then here's another example. How many of you have heard, this is something I saw on Jack's page as well, how many of you have heard the term DSH? DSH. It's a brand new term to me. My brother Jack, when he was pointing out, saying it was a brand new term to him, he didn't even take it serious. DSH stands for Drag Story Hour. DSH stands for Drag Story Hour. You're about to see how it's related to what I just talked about, right? It stands for Drag Story Hour. Got my man Jack Keon coming on this thing. Go ahead and get him on here. You trying to jump on and talk, brother, or you just watching?
Maybe a little bit of both. It depends on where the conversation goes.
Oh, absolutely. I'll leave you rocking with me. Let me know if you want to jump in. And so I'm kind of moving through some quick hitters before I get into our main conversation tonight. This is something I'm just trying to do, a new format to get some other topics, then get into our main discussion. So anyway, have you heard of, matter of fact, I asked you real quick, have you heard of DSH? I just learned of this today.
DHH?
DSH. It's, we got acronyms for everything in these eras.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Which one is that? Department of Health and Services?
Nah, it actually stands for Drag Story Hour.
No, I ain't heard that one. That's a new one.
So what happens is there's actually a movement going around the country that pushes Drag Story Hour. And so what happens is the guy I got the post from, the reason he wrote it, because he, I guess, was aware of this term, but didn't take it
Mm-hmm.
serious. And he said in his post, I didn't take it serious until this happened near him. He's somewhere in the Northeast or whatever. And what it is there's a movement to have stories told to elementary kid students by people dressed in drag. This is a
Oh,
full out
yeah, I've heard
movement.
that. I didn't know there was an acronym for it. Yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't familiar with it. So I was just talking about how far we can go with the word equality, because a couple of weeks ago we did a show saying because of the lack of public discourse is the reason that equality can now turn into unfairness. I'm just trying to show how it's all related. And so pushing for equality can go too far if we're not able to have, I consider, just smart dialogue about, does this make sense? What I talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago was, you probably have heard of it, where the transgender woman got the people pregnant in the prison. I talked about that on the show a couple of weeks ago. And so I just feel like the DSH ends up being a continuation of echo chambers yelling people down in the name of equality, but it's just lack of common sense discourse to kind of say, hey, it's not necessary to have somebody in drag telling these kids stories. And we've had that conversation on the show before, but I just wanted to highlight one, had people heard about it, and how I think it is a continuance of pushing equality in a very ineffective way, in my opinion, because of the lack of civil discourse that just simply says, this is not necessary because what is the point for elementary kids? Your thoughts, but that's how I feel about it.
I'm okay with it. I'm all for equality. I'm probably one of those people that's extreme. I don't see how it hurts. If you can show me how it hurts, then I might switch my opinion. But I don't think it hurts the children. I don't think it hurts anybody. I think in a society where we don't have enough people reading in the first place, and we don't have people that want to volunteer to read, I don't really see how that's an issue. From everything that I've read about it and seen about it, the kids seem to like it, and the adults that put it on seem to like it. And I haven't heard of anyone being traumatized or hurt or anything because of it.
So here's the pushback. The pushback is simply this. So liking it, there's plenty of things that we like, right? We like, here it is. I love hip hop music, but I'm very aware of how it can be detrimental, right? So liking it cannot be the barometer. And so what happens is, for the most part, as humans, naturally, certain ages, our hormones are going to become what they are, right? And so we become aware. We have to start naturally becoming aware of our sexuality and what that might be at that time. So introduction to over sexualizing children, because this is one thing you know about me personally. I'm against all over sexualizing, regardless of heterosexual, homosexual, transgender. I'm against all over sexualizing. Obviously, this is me personally, so I am consistent, and it becomes unnecessary to highlight someone's sexuality for a story hour. It becomes completely unnecessary for kids to even explore what does this mean, because prior to some of the pushes that we have now, again, I think transgender in women's sports is too far. I consider this as an example of too far too, because prior to the time we have now, people who are going to be transgender are going to do that anyway. People who are going to dress in drag are going to do that anyway. And they're able to find that out without having to have somebody get in front of them, prance in front of them at an elementary age. And the kids have to figure out, this person is dressed as a woman for what? That's not a necessary consideration. It's over sexualizing of all things story hour. I call complete BS on it.
Well, my thing is there's a thin line between a lot of this stuff, but the same people that may agree with you would have no problem looking at a Tyler Perry movie with their children. And they'll look at those, they'll be like, oh, this is good. They'll go to church and talk about it. But when it comes to someone reading a story, then it's a problem. But if it was Tyler Perry in the same library reading as his character Medea, then people probably wouldn't have a
No, that's not
problem with
true.
it.
That's not true. So here's the difference. We absolutely don't want Medea showing up to the elementary school. Now, what happens for individual families, if they are so choosing to allow their children, because that's what allowing their family, can't control their home, if they're okay with their children seeing Medea in a comedic character, which is very common. So I don't necessarily have a heartache with that being a character in a movie that I'm choosing to show my children. However, making elementary school hour, there's absolutely no purpose other than to highlight the sexuality. It's serving no other purpose than that. And I do not want my children going to school at elementary age before they're even having the hormonal issues of figuring out their own sexuality. I don't want that being part of their school discussion. That
Well,
makes
I think one of the confusions is that we think this is about sexuality and drag queens.
Why would you do it? Why would you do it for elementary?
Why would you not? I mean, the thing is, you take. Why would you not?
Would we be exploring sexuality for sixth grade, for 6-year-olds?
You wherever you go, you take your sexuality. You don't stop being a heterosexual man when you start reading.
In the 6th
you
grade,
don't do you when you start reading stories to children, you don't stop being a heterosexual man.
So what's the drive to have drag story hour? Let's not BS.
I think it's basically colorful, it's imaginative, and I think they're just basically expanding people's views and things. The same reason why you have clowns. Why would you have a clown read something? Why does someone have to wear makeup and dress up as a clown?
No, it's definitely not equivalent, because a clown being comedy has nothing to do with children exploring the sexuality of who's in front of them.
But neither does drag queen.
So to have an intentional drag story to be disingenuous about the reason why they want to have this movement, that's being disingenuous. That's
Wait
why.
a minute, did you see some paperwork saying there is a movement and an agenda?
Yeah, that's why it came up. That's why it's coming around. It's a push. That's why we have the term
DSA. There is always somebody that says something is a push, but I haven't been to the meetings. I haven't seen it. So if we take it to its logical conclusion,
it probably won't make it to Georgia, hopefully. But yeah,
I think we've already had it here in Georgia. They even had it in Kentucky, because I read the paper up in Louisville, and they had it up there.
So how did they have it if it's not a movement?
It's not a movement. It's basically just something that happens. It's probably more organic than you would like to admit.
No, it's absolutely.
Someone said, "Can I read the story?" Oh wow, we don't have too many adults that want to do that. Can I do it in drag? Sure. Okay.
So what happens is story hour has been coming in schools forever. They're now intentionally putting a drag person in front of these children to explore something they've never had to explore during story hour. All right, brother. You agree with it? Well, there's actually that's why there's a name to it. There's a name to it because it's being pushed, just so you know. But anyway, we don't have to agree on it. That's what we do here. I'm just letting you know that they're not putting it in front of those children to not highlight the sexuality of that person. And that's the difference between what story hour has been before for what it is now. We don't have to agree on it, but that's definitely the intention, even if I'm wrong about the movement, right? So I maybe I don't know enough details to know if it's a movement, but we can't say it's being done other than to highlight that difference, because otherwise there's no reason to highlight it. It would just be done without that being part of it. So that's just, again, that's what's behind it, regardless of whether it's a movement or not. But that's fair. I don't know enough details to know if it's a movement. But here's one other thought, and then we're going to get into our main topic. Michelle, if I see you come off mute, I'll let you jump in anytime you want, Queen. Any thoughts on this at this moment, or you just rocking with me?
I'm pleading the fifth on this one. I'm just going to go ahead and listen.
All right, sounds good. So one other topic I wanted to bring up real quick. I'm going to share this cut, and it's just something I saw real briefly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Then we're going to get into the courting versus dating. I'm gonna play an actual cut from my man.
It's your man Tim Jackson, Mr. Purpose.
I jumped on sooner than I wanted.
And listen,
y'all just listen.
Yesterday for clowning a former NBA player for checking in. Well, let's peel back some layers to this real quick. Behind me, you see a picture of Mark Zuckerberg showing up to Oak Cliff in one of the toughest hoods in the city. He didn't have to check in. Exhibit B, Tony Hawk just opened up a skate park in one of the hoods in Detroit. He didn't have to check in either. In every hood and every city in America, they turn down where you live and building up mega structures. They ain't got to check in. People on the East Coast can't even find a place to stay over $3,000 or under $3,000. They ain't making them folks check in when they running you out your hood. Y'all giving so much credit and clout to these because they ain't doing a goddamn thing for the neighborhood. It's like me who actually done created solutions like my book that's done kept hundreds of thousands of people out of prison. I got to check in. Tell me why that makes sense. Y'all logic is flawed. I'll stand on what I said. Hey, what's good? It's your man, Tim Jack.
All right, so it played a little quicker than I expected it to play or whatever, but I hope you caught the gist of everything. And so, brother, I'll tell you, you eating on the thing don't look that good. Let me just tell you that real talk. I don't know. I let people jump in raw as ever.
I didn't have time to prepare one of my culinary delights as usual, but you know I can throw down when given the proper time and planning.
But I would say, see if you could do like Michelle, mute your video and stay on with your audio. Thank you. All right. So anyway, just wanted to trouble just real quick. I got my girl Deasia jumping on this thing, so I'm gonna add her to the stream. Any of y'all can jump on. Just hit the link below on Facebook or YouTube. But I just played a cut from a brother that I followed, Tim Jackson. Big fan of this brother, and he was just highlighting something that I saw. Also, all right, Deasia got some stuff in the background, so I'm gonna mute you for right now. All right. So he was highlighting something that happened. If you're familiar with Steven Jackson, former NBA player, activist, definitely jumped on the George Floyd stuff. If you're familiar with Steven Jackson, pretty much respected, if you will, throughout the culture, if you will. But he recently, in case you don't know, he recently did a video. I saw it maybe yesterday, so I don't know exactly when he did it. But he did a video where he had went to Chicago and he checked in, quote unquote, checked in with the infamous O Block. And for those that don't know, that's a particular gang set in Chicago. And we always hear about all the stories about all the violence and stuff that happens in Chicago, if you will. And so Steven Jackson, someone that I personally have been a fan of for a lot of things that he do. My man Tim Jackson stirred up some stuff. I got Emil jumping on this thing too. Again, y'all can all come in. So he stirred up a little controversy. My brother Tim, stirred up a little controversy because he highlighted the silliness of Steven Jackson, highlighting that when he went to O Block, his verbiage, I'm just paraphrasing, was something to the effect of, it's okay to check in. I'm a real one, so I come and check in. So he was highlighting his fact that he was on the block with the O Block gangsters, if you will, and they was giving him props, and he was just basically considering himself a real one and getting props, if you will, from the culture because he could check in. He didn't have to worry about the O Block cats getting at him or robbing him, or in particular because he checked in. Because if you're not familiar, for those that listen and not familiar what check in means, so it's an idea that different places around the city, if you are kind of in a sense from the streets and you're going to go to somebody else's city, then you should check in with the prominent gangsters of that city to ensure that there's protection and you don't get robbed. But if you go to their city without checking in, then you're at risk and the consequences may be whatever. So it's something that is permeated the gang culture supposedly for a lot of years. Tim Jackson was calling out Steven Jackson for acquiescing to the concept of needing to check in. That's why he highlighted Mark Zuckerberg built something in the hood. He didn't need to check in. I forgot who else he highlighted, saying that these other people coming to our cities are never having to check in, and it's actually very silly for us that are active, or for Stephen, I'll say him as an activist or anybody that's actually trying to help the neighborhood. It becomes silly and it's kind of immature to acquiesce to their language. You can go help the block without using gangster terms that says, hey, if you don't check in, you could be in danger. Why are we building that up in the culture? And it reminds me of the show we did a while back where I said it's time for hip hop to grow the F up. So that's all I got to say about it. Anybody else want to jump into it before we get into our main subject? I got several people on here. So if you come off the mic, just jump in this thing.
I agree with the sentiment.
I appreciate it. Again, that's just one of our quick hitters. We're about to get into the main topic here. Deasia, I don't know if you got a look, if you're clean in the background, but I'm pretty sure you got something to say about that thought. I don't know if you paid attention to what happened, but I agree with my man Tim Jackson, and I just wanted to highlight that to say, as he's standing on it, I also stand with his perspective that it's immature to keep catering to the youth language, even when you're trying to help them sometimes.
Okay, was Tim Jackson the one saying, the one said that he checked in, right?
No, Tim Jackson is actually calling out Steven Jackson for highlighting that he checked in, and when he was on the block with the O Block cats, highlighting that, hey, I check in, and he said it's okay to check in. And Tim Jackson said, that's silly. You are activist. Why would you be checking in. It's not a requirement for the average person. Why would the average person acquiesce to gang language?
Well, I think the person who tried to chastise him thought too far into it and was reaching, and the person who was actually there was just probably just talking, because it doesn't even checking in don't even work like that. It's only like when people are, if you rap and things like that and you want to make sure that you have some level of protection in the city. It's not one of those things where it's where he trying to make it like it's so horrible. He was just the guy that was there. I think for him, he was trying to make it seem like, I could be in the hood, or I'm around my people, and they accept me and things like that. The average person does not have to check in. If you rap or something, you're a celebrity, then yeah, you may have to check in. That's what the checking in is for. If you ain't from there and you in somebody's hood, that's a whole totally different thing. If you from another hood, then you just a op. It ain't no checking in. Checking in is to give a level of protection for the people who, they ain't there as opposition, but they might be having money on them, or they might be flashy, or whatever they might be known. And it's just a level of protection to keep them from possibly getting harmed. I think that the guy that chastised him, he just wanted to find something to chastise him about, because it really wasn't that deep to do all of that, to me, in my opinion.
I respect, again, we can agree to disagree. I think it's absolutely immature. It's time for hip hop to grow the fuck up. And it's silly as hell, in my opinion, that we're even talking about checking in, and it's only our culture that has to check in. That's some silly ass
Right,
shit.
but we got to also keep in mind, Montoya, our culture is our culture. So we can't continuously compare our culture to other cultures, because honestly, we're not a part of their culture for real. We don't know what they do. You know what I'm saying? We know what we do, and we don't know what type of
But a man, I
ways
don't know if you heard
they
examples, but he gave examples of other people that were doing stuff in those neighborhoods to bring them up, and they're not checking in. So I would
they're
love to
not part of our culture. They probably don't even know what the hell check in means.
right, and it's silly
But
that
you being part of the culture,
yeah, that's
if
silly.
you been I mean, I'm not saying that it's not silly. What I'm saying is comparing our culture to someone else's culture, and him actually not even understanding the concept for real.
No,
Yeah,
he
it's gonna be.
understands the concept like I understand it, and we both call it silly as hell. And it's not take the other culture out of it. Just us doing it is silly as hell.
It's not silly if it's allowing the person a level of protection. How is it silly if you going into this bad neighborhood where they rob people that unfortunately we looking at a deeper issue. Unfortunately, they rob people that look like them. They rob people who are celebrities. They rob people who come in and look like money. They rob people who, look like they got more than them. If checking in is going to give you a level of protection, then what's the problem? Now, the fact that they are in these impoverished communities, and they look at another Black person as a come up instead of others who come in their community, that's a more deep rooted issue. But applying that level of protection, if you in somebody's hood for your own people, I don't see how that's an issue. I think that if you haven't been in the streets, or if you haven't been and don't know people been affected by things like that, or you haven't had certain status, and you might wanted to go to certain neighborhoods and show love or whatever, then yeah, it's easy to say, hey, this doesn't make sense. But it is what it is. You can't saying that it doesn't make sense ain't gonna stop it. And it's nothing wrong with having that level of protection.
Yeah, that's how you stop it. You call out ignorant behavior to begin to stop it, because without it, it'll just continue to be the thing. And now we're highlighting it as part of the average person culture. Hey, this is the thing you need to do. That's silly as hell. We could disagree with it, but yes, calling it out. We can't stop these bad acts if we don't start calling out bad behavior, in my opinion. So we'll close that out. We're going to jump into the gist of what we want to get into. I wanted to do a conversation. I wanted to share one more thought that I got from Facebook, brother that's been on my show before, Vaughn. And I thought this was just a good dialogue. Again, our goal is to, raise the culture. So glad y'all jumping on. Glad y'all watching. Please share and subscribe to what you're doing if you like what we're doing. Ultimately, just trying to have some intellectual conversations for you intellectual outcasts out there.
Well, you trying to raise the culture. You don't raise my blood pressure.
Well, yeah, that's fine. If you think it makes sense for people that are out of the streets to still be catering to the culture versus raising the kids up and saying this is how you do this.
Well, if you go in them people hood, you better act like they do in the hood. You can't go in their hood and thinking they finna change all of a sudden. And if you go in the hood, you gotta play by their rules.
So nobody thinks that they're gonna change all of a sudden. We're talking about grown men catering to their language as if they're still in the streets. That is absolutely silly, and I'm glad Tim called that brother out. And I love Steve.
And if that man went in there and checked in, he probably would have came out robbed. So, I guess.
So what you're getting confused is you're acting like we're calling out the checking in. We're calling out the highlighting of that culture to make and act like that's real. You don't have, if he checks in because that's what he needs to do and he needs protection, that's one thing. But putting it on social media, telling the rest of our culture, this is what you need to do on video and acting like it's a good thing and saying there's nothing wrong with it is crazy as hell for grown men to be talking like that. So
to me,
I know I said I wasn't in it, but what was the man doing in the community?
He didn't show in this example, but Steven Jackson is very involved in the community, just like you heard Tim Jackson say, hey, what he's doing. And it's just talking about grown men. We're just talking about being grown men to these young boys who've had no leadership. And we're calling out this one thing as a lack of leadership because you're catering to their language to highlight this on social media as if it's the thing to do. Grown men should not be talking that way, in my opinion. And I just simply agree with Tim Jackson. Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I just had that question because the examples that were put out was Mark Zuckerberg and Tony Hawk, I think, went to those communities and they didn't check in, but they also have a very large security detail and they weren't staying overnight. So I don't know what the context of the other man was. I'm not in the conversation. I do think it is silly, but I don't know the full details to say, is it silly or not?
Right. And I'm just highlighting that the only way we're going to grow up is start calling out what's silly about the parts from the streets that we pull into our everyday culture. That's all we're talking about, the concept of it. But anyway, I wanted to go to this other thought real quick that I saw by my brother Vaughn, The Alchemist. Let me find this cut. It's real short. And this is what's going to lead into the courting versus dating. I don't necessarily have answers on this. I just want to dialogue about people with some thoughts I've had on the idea of courting versus dating. Give me 1 second.
Well, you got to get some more men on your team because you got two women at this point.
Nah, I can dig it. Well, we're just going to have a dialogue about it. It ain't even got to be that long. But this is what Vaughn said that sparked me to want to talk about this. So he put up a post a few days back that says, the market was flooded with easy, meaningless sex, and we lost focus on the importance of real connections and building strong families. Hashtag fly guy. Hashtag bad bitch, but a broken nation. I love that post. And it says, hey, let me turn this into something. It's something I want to talk about. And when I read it, it made me think back to the past where there was courting. And then myself, our generation, really right before us, the sexual revolution led to kind of similar to what he says, a lot of meaningless sex that became part of the culture in a way that I think leads to what he put in here. And it just, again, it made me think about the first time I literally heard about courting. It's not something that I necessarily or have been raised with courting, but there's some ideas that I want to share with y'all. But when y'all hear that, post versus me just kind of going into my thoughts, I'll be interesting in hearing both of you. What was your first thought in hearing it? I'll read it real quick one more time. The market was flooded with easy, meaningless sex, and we lost focus on the importance of real connection and building strong families. Hashtag fly guy, hashtag bad bitch, but a broken nation. Michelle, I think you were on first, so I'll let you just kind of hear your thoughts to that because I want to get into this conversation.
I mean, if this was a question asked to me 10 years ago, I would feel differently.
Okay.
But as a 33, almost 34-year-old, it's a little bit different now. I agree with the sentiment. I don't know when the time period was, because when he said it was like pointless, meaningless sex at a time period, is he talking about like the 90s or is he talking about like Tinder hookups? And I like it. It was impactful. But I don't quite know where to put it yet. And Deasia unmuted, so I'll let her go.
I actually like what he said, but I always find it funny when people, highlight things from back in the day and make it seem like we're so doomed. People been having pointless, meaningless sex since the beginning of times. So it's like all of a sudden, our pointless and meaningless sex, I don't feel like where people were saying, oh, it's pointless and it's meaningless. Okay, that ruined the nation. The generation before had to drop the ball. So my thing is, I come up in a generation where it was the latchkey kids and things like that. Or, before that you had the our grandma and them generation, baby boomers, and then you had our mama's generation where they was having having their kids in high school and all of that. So there has been pointless, meaningless sex since the beginning of time. So I don't think that the act of sex, I don't like when people try to demonize sex itself. I don't feel like the acts of sex is the problem. I feel like the people are not being raised on morals and principles, and people are not ashamed of anything. There's not enough messaging out there as far as telling people, how to properly date, how to properly vet somebody, and giving them a time period of when, hey, by this particular time, you need to have cut this off. You should have you a wife or a husband or something by now. Back then, when I was coming up, it was a point in time where it was like if you was a certain age and you were still out here in the streets and you didn't have a husband or something like that, then your family will look at you funny. Or what you doing, what you got going on, when you gonna get married, when you gonna have a kid. Nowadays, the family don't hold anybody responsible for anything. There's no real moral compass. So I feel like it's more of that needs to be done. Where people need to start focusing on how they actually raise their kids versus having sex. Because we gonna have pointless, meaningless sex because we have sex for recreational purposes. I have sex because it feels good, not because I'm fucked up and don't want a husband. So it's like, people have to put that into perspective as well. I agree with what he's saying. I get what he's saying. I get where he's going, but I think it can be a slippery slope because it can get a little bit too judgmental and skip over the real issue.
And men don't hold men accountable specifically. She pointed out families not holding people accountable, but I am saying directly that men don't hold men accountable the way that they used to. And that's crazy. Y'all need to do better.
So I'll just simply say to you, versus creating a whole other issue, which is thank you for that thought. Go listen to the show, the mental dialogue, not the video show, not just my 3 cents. But a matter of fact, I'll send it to you. The show, Can Good Men Check Fuck Boys? And I think you might think a little different once you hear that show. Just throwing it out. We won't get it.
But you know what, Montoya? You don't even have to be a fuckboy for what she's talking about. From what she's talking about and what he's talking about, people have meaningless sex. You don't have to be a fuckboy to have meaningless sex. We all have meaningless sex at some point.
You're getting caught up in the term. I was just highlighting that was the title of the show when she said men don't hold each other accountable. So I was just telling her the name of the show that would address that issue. So that was,
the part that I was pointing out was the broken families, right?
Mhm.
So family units typically involve a man, woman, and child. And a lot of the times it's the woman and the child. The man's not there. The woman's there, but the man's not there. And I know that there's plenty of single dads out there before y'all come at me. But I believe what this gentleman was saying when he was referring to broken homes was that the man is out of the picture. And statistically speaking, for our culture, the man is out of the picture.
So I don't think he was pointing that out at all, in my personal opinion. Fair for you to get
Okay.
that interpretation. Yeah, it's fair. No, that's a fair interpretation. You could be right, but I wanted to let Glenn jump in here before I, give you my thoughts on it. Glenn, did you want to jump in on the conversation so far?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so I'm in that age group around 34, 35. So from my perspective, I just think that, the culture definitely shifted where it wasn't cool to court, and it didn't seem like it was the natural progression, at least growing up in my high school or college, and even after. The notion was, even from elders, that I knew, was you wait for marriage, you go to high school, college, you see what you like out there, you date a while, and then when you have your finances ready, then you settle down. But you don't settle down for like the first person that you see. You take your time, and you definitely don't settle down before the financial component. So a lot of young men in my age group, we were told that until you have your money right, you date, you see what you like, but you don't really get super serious until your education's done and your money's right, because you're going to be responsible for a family. And then those that, and then sorry, there's a lot of noise, but the generation before me that had children earlier, when they were in their early 20s and really didn't wait to get themselves established, it always seemed to be like a doomsday story. Like, oh, I had, kids too early, or I didn't have time to do this or time to do that. Well, make sure that that you're going to college, doing your thing. Wait, wait, wait. So that, combined with, a lot of the influence of hip hop culture, where it seems, like that's the thing to do, or that's what everyone's doing, that's what you should be doing, where you're dating but you're not taking it very seriously. That, combined with your parents telling you to wait, it just created a culture where I'm not really supposed to get serious or court until, later down the line. And until then, I can kind of just do what everybody else is doing. And I think that just plays a big role into, the generational differences that we're talking about. That's all.
Yeah, I love that point. I always like to highlight, I've highlighted this on the show before, that even for the prior generations who might, in a sense, judge us, if you will, for quote unquote the amount of meaningless sex that we appear to have, or like you say, it is supported within the culture, if you will. The reality is they wasn't waiting or being told to wait when their hormones ran wild. Previous generations typically got married much younger than we did, and had they been in a culture in which you waited to, the average right now is 27 years old, nationwide or whatever, but just 30 years ago was 23 years old. That's a huge difference, if you will.
Okay.
And so I think you're making a great point, Glenn, that part of how the marketplace plays out as far as economics and job opportunity goes, that's a factor that previous generations did not have to deal with. So very good point.
I wanted to add that. I wanted to add something real quick. Because you have mentioned it a little bit as well, but like the economics of raising a family, right? So men for countless generations, I don't know about saying wait until marriage. I don't think that men were waiting, but they weren't getting married until they either came back from the service or they had a job where they were making enough to take care of a family. But in the 70s, you could do that on one income.
Right, that's true.
Now you can't. And in many, both mother and father are working, sometimes 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet, so it's not feasible to wait until you're financially stable, because if you're not married, odds are you will never be financially stable. But no, it's just now you're getting married at 40 instead of 20 something. So
Yeah. No, good point. Good point. So I want to break down the comment again, and Deasia knows I can be literal. So again, what you brought into it, Michelle, is very fair. I'm just giving my perspective, but again, Deasia knows this. I'm kind of very literal, and so when the brother says the market was flooded by easy, meaningless sex, I'm looking at that as, in a sense, the dating market. And, again, factoring in what Glenn has already said, we're the first generation that waited to much later. So I don't know how realistic it was to tell any of us to wait, whether we were the men or women, based on we're not getting married, like who's going to be a virgin until they're 30, right? Like there's not a lot of realism to that, if you will. So I'm acknowledging that. I'm just highlighting that I take some of what he's saying literal. And so flooded with easy, meaningless sex. I think if you think about some of what Glenn said, where you're going along and you can get used to doing this. So that's, in my opinion, from a psychological standpoint, because we've had this experience for longer than previous generations. Because like Deasia said, quite often, even the men might not be told to wait, but quite often your father and grandfather looking at you like, boy, when you gonna grow up and get you a family? So even that direction, regardless of whether they were quote unquote sowing their wild oats, there still was an expectation that you would, in a sense, take on the responsibility of a family sooner than being suggested for either of us, specifically our community, Black women and Black men. And so when I read Vaughn's posts to say the market is flooded with easy, meaningless sex, I would offer, and I'll give my own personal relative experience. Obviously, doesn't necessarily apply to all men, but I wanted to highlight it to get into the psychology of it. So I would offer having meaningless sex maybe for a lot longer than previous generations is how we can lose focus, because it says we lost focus on the importance of real connection and building strong families. So I would just offer, by way of simply doing this for a lot longer, makes it more difficult to make the transition that Glenn alluded to, especially without having a previous generation encouraging you to make a real connection, encouraging you to have a strong family. So I see it just factual from the standpoint of, if you do something too long, it becomes difficult to transition back to the importance of family. Y'all thoughts on that? Again, that's just my initial thoughts on the psychology of this happening for so long. Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
all right. So again, I don't disagree with the sentiment of the post, especially being, because I think I was like 20-ish when like internet dating started to like really take off. And there's just like, I think it was like Craigslist, actually. So it was probably like before then, because Craigslist always had like casual hookups.
Okay.
And like that wasn't a thing that previous generations had to deal with. Previous generations didn't have to deal with Tinder. Previous generations didn't have to deal with, just like, as my friends call it, D on demand. And I edit it myself, because like I can order a pizza and order something else that starts with a P, and the other P might get here before the pizza get here. So there is this element of easy access to someone else's body for biological needs. Again, I'm trying to be proper because I don't want when I run for president, I want people to say I said this. So there is an aspect to that, but I think the biggest aspect there for me, because I didn't get it until you said it the third time, was the connections part. My particular generation, and I'm speaking for all of us, but myself as well, is we have a hard time connecting with people on a different level. And really the next generation has it worse than we do. And I think it's a more of a social media, global society type deal, where it's just like this gap, like 80 to 85, they were good. And then 85 to 90 happened, and it's like something just wasn't right with us, right? So it's just like we have a harder time making those deeper connections. And I would even disconnect it from sex, because we know the difference. We know what connections and deep things are. I don't think that we were ever taught to stick it out.
Do we know the difference?
I feel like I know the difference.
And when you say difference, because he related it to real connections and strong family. So maybe, I don't know if you're putting those two things together. So when you say the difference, help me understand your difference.
So strong connection, and I'm talking sexually, right? Okay. So there's making love, right? And then there is fornicating under carnal knowledge. Spell that out, right? So I'll say it again for the people in the back, because Montoya look lost. Fornicating under carnal knowledge. There you go. So there is that quick pee that'll get here before the pizza man will, right? And that person don't know nothing about me, right? Right. But someone, and now we're talking about courting and dating. I'm trying to bring this in. So, but someone who I'm trying to actually build something with, someone that is courting me, and I'd be courting him, showing the best aspects of life. If we ever became intimate, which is a longer process for that to occur, which men don't appreciate, and I understand, I get it. If we got to the point of intimacy, that's not fornicating under carnal knowledge. That would be a more loving, deeper connection.
All right, so let me get a couple comments from James.
Oh, Lord.
Yep, James, he got knocked off, whatever, so he can't come back on. He said he got knocked off, so he's commenting. He says no people don't know the difference, and it's from different aspects. He says men usually think ownership and possession, and women think emotional connection and security, etc., then possession. So I'm gonna offer something a little I would say even deeper than what you're saying, based on what I think the post is saying. Doesn't mean I'm right, but I'll just highlight this. So I do agree that most of us know the difference between really having connection sexually versus just kind of casual sex. So that I would agree with from the beginning. What I would offer when he says we lost focus, because then the next part is strong families. So that's what I mean about not knowing the difference. So yeah, do I love you versus casual sex? That's, I think, easy for humans to understand. But when you're highlighting the idea that eventually I'm trying to court someone to have a family with, you typically don't want to have meaningless sex. And even having the sex where you're intimate and really love each other, that alone isn't enough. The focus is even higher than that. And I think a bunch of meaningless sex, unfortunately, for as long as I keep highlighting this, for as long as we've, in a sense, been allowed to do it, because who's really encouraging us to get married at earlier ages, if you will? That's not really happening in the culture.
Roe versus Wade is doing it now.
This is what I'm curious to know. Okay. What does sex supposed to mean? Like, what is it supposed to mean? Like, people be saying, "Oh, you having meaningless sex." We be married and have meaningless sex. We ain't going. You have sex to bust a nut. So I don't get what this whole thing about. Oh, it has to mean something.
Okay, so
the sex itself. What does the sex itself have to mean? Because you're not having sex for a purpose, even if you're married all the time.
Go ahead, Glenn. I think Glenn wanted to say something. Glenn, were you trying to pipe in?
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say that that there's different levels to it, and I'm not sure if it's the same for women, but men can put sex in different categories. So if a person is someone you're gonna build with, it's one thing. If it's someone you're just dating, that's it's another thing. And you can, have very, very different experiences. Sex doesn't have to be under one particular flavor, when it comes to it. So I agree with that, and it's a little different for everybody. But I will say that people have to understand, like, for themselves, what fits for them, because there are people that try to live that meaningless sex, and they don't understand that they're the kind of person that gets attached, and it down the line causes a certain amount of damage. And other people, they can do that and they don't think twice about it. Like, everyone is geared a little bit differently on how much sex impacts them emotionally and mentally. And if you don't understand that about yourself, then you could be having fun 1 minute and then be depressed the next minute. All the more reason why, as I was saying earlier, the generation before me was kind of saying, wait, take your time, date around, figure yourself out, figure where you are on the spectrum before you lock in and you build one person, for the rest of your life. Because once you're in that, there's no more trying to figure stuff out. Like, that's what you got to work with. So
are y'all talking about like casual sex with multiple people? Is
well,
that
there's
is
well,
that what
there,
is being
well,
considered meaningless?
Well, there's layers. So obviously there's sex like someone you just meet online, like your Tinder or whatever, and then there's sex as someone you're going on a few dates with. Maybe it happens the second, third, or fourth date or something. Then there's sex like obviously in a long-term relationship. There's sex in marriage. I mean, there's different levels to it, but I'm just saying every person is layered differently, and some people can meet people online and go the Tinder thing and the next morning not think twice about it. And other people can meet someone online and they can't stop thinking about the person for several weeks. Like it's like not everything works for everybody. You have to find your frequency with that. That's all.
I think
Yeah,
she was looking
I
for
can
a
see it.
definition.
Hold on, let Michelle go there. You can finish there. Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just saying, I think she was looking for a definition about what we're calling meaningless versus purposeful. Even though we didn't say purposeful, but it has to be the opposite side of that coin. So that's what I was going to say to Glenn.
Yeah, I'll give some thoughts to that, but I just wanted to let
Yeah.
them finish. And Diaz, you wanted to say something as well, so I'm just letting them finish.
Yeah, because I think that people confuse. For me, I find that people confuse dating with like actually having sex, and so a lot of people, they will date multiple people and they'll also be having sex with that number amount of people that they're actually dating. And so I see if it's something like that, yeah, I can get it. But if you're dating someone and y'all been dealing with each other, y'all not married or anything like that, at some point you're going to have sex. So it's like, what is that considered to be meaningless? Because you haven't actually married that person or anything yet? Or what? That's the part that I'm not getting. Like, because you have sex in a dating phase.
I have a response.
That's my opinion. That's all the vote that I'm trying to say is, sorry, my vote on it was just that it's not meaningless versus non-meaningless. It's different layers of meaning. So it's not just a flip a coin. It means something or it doesn't. Like sex for someone you just met versus sex with someone you're actually dating and considering for a few weeks, and sex like in a marriage. I mean, those are three different levels. And I'm just saying some people, have multiple levels. Some people, unless you're thinking about marriage, sex means nothing. If it's thinking about marriage, then it means everything. Some people are binary like that with that, and some people have levels to it. That's all I'm saying. When you bring in the term what's meaningful or meaningless.
So it's like if you're not if you don't have intentions on marrying this person, basically you shouldn't be having sex with them.
Well, let me give you an example. Like if I meet someone on Tinder and like they say they're on their little profile that they're just looking for hookups. If we hook up, I'm not thinking at all about them the next day or how they feel. That's what it was. But if I find someone, we go on dates, and maybe the fourth or fifth date, it happens and we've been talking every day. I don't know if I want to marry them, but it's a possibility it could be something. So I care about how the person is going to feel and react to it. That doesn't mean that it's meaningless or meaningful. It just means it has potential because they reach another level of meaning. So that's all I'm saying. There's a progression to it. It's not just an on and off button.
Okay, I get what you're saying. It's more so based on the intention.
Yeah, exactly. The intention
Okay.
and yeah.
All right, I wanted to bring some other thoughts, but I want to share some of what I got in the comments as well. Tiffany says some people get attached after sex. Some don't show a connection. Yes, there are levels to it. She also says meaningless when you don't or won't feel it. When you don't or don't want to feel a connection, you don't mind if you ever speak or deal with that person after the fact. Kind of her thoughts. So what I wanted to bring to the table, because I will say again, I know I do everything literal, so I'll just kind of point that out. So when this brother says meaningless sex floods the market, I'm not even thinking he's even talking about, you know, whether you should have meaningless sex or not. But with the idea of flooding the market and it becoming the prominent way that we're having sex because we're not thinking about focused on families in the future, which I think is very prevalent at this point in our culture. The unfortunate reality is, if you look historically, even in this country, there was a time where there were less than 5% of children that were born out of wedlock. And there was a time, even in this country, there are cultures in the world currently right now that they put so much importance on sex that they're still doing. They're definitely, I have some friends that are from one friend from Nigeria, one friend from Ghana that tells me that in their cultures, they still actually hold the men and women to the in their tribe, I should say. I shouldn't highlight the whole country, but in their tribes, they actually hold the men and women damn near to the same standard. And so if you, in their cultures, which is kind of old school for American culture, in my opinion, but to this day, even in their culture, if you go there, and this is definitely the case in, you know, in some of the strict Middle East countries, that if you go there with a woman, you are expected to take her on because in their culture and their belief system, you are marrying someone with the act of sex. And that's obviously an extreme, but I remember my mother having me very young, and that was part of I'm in the South, right? And so one of the first thoughts from my father's side of the thought was, you know, he needs to marry her. And my grandmother absolutely understood that wasn't a smart move for them, so they never got married. But I always say, we as a hip hop generation, I always say at our age, we're the same age as hip hop. So we really were the first generation to start experiencing that in the majority, because even in 1965, if you will, there was if you ever heard of the Monahan report, that report was highlighting the dangers of the Black community when the out of wedlock rate, for example, was at 25%. So it was considered alarming in 1965, where 75% of our children were still being born in a strong family. And so I'm just kind of pointing out the nuance, not getting into whether meaningless sex should be had or not. I'm just pointing out the ultimate perspective, in my opinion, of this post, where he's saying, well, once we flooded the market with that, we've lost focus on even figuring out who am I going to marry and have children with, and the sex being used specifically for that. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I just wanted to make a quick comment, and it's the same comment I've been making. Society is different now. We don't live in those small pockets of society. And I'm specifically thinking anecdotally about my grandmother's situation, where she had a child at 14 and she was forced to marry this grown man, essentially, because there were societal consequences, not necessarily for her, not necessarily for the baby, because it was the whole thing about the birth certificate and it saying bastard on it and the whole thing, but minus that, to the baby, it was like the family would have had social consequences as far as just like a church-based community. And I'm not from the South, I'm from North, but country North is where my family originated from. It was societal pressures because they lived in small knit communities. And so if your daughter, and she was raped by her stepfather, and she became pregnant at 14, she had a child at 14, and she was sent to Staten Island and had to marry this 30-something-year-old man and take care of his children, right? But it was that was less frowned upon than my grandmother having my aunt out of wedlock. Well, being raped and then having my aunt out of wedlock. So there was more societal consequences, and it was just a whole different vibe of what marriage really was.
So I say, to Von's point, obviously those are, like I say, anecdotal and very unfortunate situations, both of them. But I'll say, to Von's point, so in our time of enjoyment and play, we've lost sight of family, which I'm just saying. And so obviously those situations where it was forced in a situation that nobody really should be forced to have a family in that situation. The societal pressure was just coming from the concept of family. So I just think Vaughn's post is just highlighting we've lost focus on strong families. So I don't want to go back to the point where we're doing those examples, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But
it was the only thing that was in my head.
yeah. I love the example. I love the example. I don't think you're pushing against what I'm saying. I'm just loving the dialogue to highlight, now that we've kind of gotten free flowing with sex, some of our issues today with trying to figure it out is we're not considering, for example, I'll give an anecdotal personal story, right? And I'm just showing you the mindset of what I think this post means. Again, I'm not getting caught up in whether you should or should not have meaningless sex. I'm talking about the consequences of the market being flooded by it. So I think my personal example is an example of this. So right now, when people put up the idea of waiting for sex or even the idea of courting, right? So one thing we know has been lost in the market of flooded sex. We've lost the concept of courting. So let's throw that out. But I'll give my personal example. So my personal example, and this is not even marriage, but I'm just showing you the mindset. So right now, if I go on social media and throw up the idea of asking, people, would you wait for sex, men specifically, or whatever, there's plenty of men that are going to be like, hell no. I think the hell no that, and I'm not saying all men, because it's put there men, whatever, but the hell no comes from, I think, this mindset. So I remember myself personally in high school, this was my second girlfriend, I think. So I had been having sex way too young for myself, right? And so sex was kind of a regular thing to me. This was my sophomore or junior year. I think it's my junior year to be exact. It was my junior year. So I had a sister that I was ready, having meaningless sex, if you want to, we'll use it for the day's term, right? So it was meaningless sex, if you will, to a degree, regular or whatever. And I had this girl that really liked me. I really liked her. And so here's the pressure I put on her in the mindset of today's generation. I basically said, I have no concept of someone being my girlfriend and we're not having sex, because she was a virgin at the time, right? And so she really liked me. I really liked her. And so in liking her, I was like, come to find out, her previous boyfriend pretended like they had had sex. So I didn't know she was a virgin, if you will. I find out that she's a virgin. He just didn't want to look bad, because that's how it was in high school, right? You don't want to look bad or whatever. So people thought she had. So I broke down to her, as much as I like you, I'm not going to be your boyfriend if we're not having sex. And so, again, I think that's coming from today's generation, right? The idea. And so what happened was, because I liked her, she agreed to it. And so we started going together the first time she ever had sex, quote unquote, boyfriend, girlfriend. And I literally went to a couple of girls I was dealing with and say, I got a girl now. Broke date, because the meaningless sex that I thought we was having broke their heart, because now I just cut them off automatically because now I have a girl. But literally, we had to have sex before I would even agree to be her boyfriend. I use my little simple anecdotal high school example to say that the market has been flooded with sex to the degree that even a lot of men have no concept of properly courting a woman that's less focused on the sex, to the point that they just expect to have a girl, go ahead and have sex, and maybe eventually I will marry you. And that's the lack of focus that I think Vaughn is alluding to. Again, very small anecdotal example, but I think my example from just being single and out there and being a quote unquote player to becoming somebody's boyfriend, it's still part and permeates our culture right now. And that's what was worth the dialogue to me. Again, it's just me, again, we're just trying to have conversations. I'm not saying a right or wrong, but just going deeper with, again, a post that I think is very effective, and effective in the point of that we could just have these dialogues and think about what does it mean for us today. Any thoughts about what I'm saying there?
Yeah. So Montoya, I do want to ask you this, because your title was courting versus dating. What do you actually think that there's a difference between dating and courting?
Absolutely. Yeah, matter of fact,
Why?
I'm gonna share you the difference right here. Let me pull up this thing. So
Okay.
I'm gonna pull it up and share the difference. But I'll say I want to share this story before I even pull this up. Let me find it. It's a screenshot I got that tells the difference, and I agree with this. But let me tell a little story. When I was in college, the first time I even really understood the concept of, I should say understood it. The first time I ever really thought heavily about the idea of courting. Up until that point, I had only seen the examples of what you might see in some of the older movies. There was plenty of movies where men back in the day would court a woman, if you will. So I didn't see it firsthand. I'm in the hip hop generation, so I didn't witness this, but I would see it in the movies a little bit. But the first time I ever thought about it, I think I was a sophomore in college, and I was listening to a Louis Farrakhan's sermon or speech or whatever, and he talked about the concept of how men back in his day would court women. So somebody has some background noise. Hold on. So women back in his, all right, let me see who has the back. Okay, got it. All right. So men in his day would actually take the time to court a woman, and how they had to go get permission from the father just to, meet on the porch, take her and walk up, walk down the street, and the family would go. So he was just telling me this whole concept of what it was like for him to court his wife. And courting is what men did when they were intentional and wanted to take on a wife. So there was these required steps that is still what courting is, and dating is far from. I just bring up that story as I get ready to share, these differences that I found on this post. I bring up this story because when I saw that, I literally said to one of my best friends in college right after I listened to that speech. We were going to lunch on the same day I listened to that sermon, and I said to my best friend, I was like, "Wow, I think it's impressive that men used to court women." And I said to him, I said, "But today in our era where we start having sex as young men, because I started at 11, unfortunately, and I'm in college at this point." So I said to my best friend, I was like, "Wow, could a woman ever intrigue me enough to where I would willing to court her?" Because what made that courting so amazing to me was that these men were courting, getting to know their potential wife, and sticking with her for life, and they wouldn't even have sex, because that made no sense in the casual sexual revolution era that I grew up. So I said to my friend, that blows my mind that they could find a lifetime of a wife through their courting process. Because I said to my friend, I couldn't imagine, now that I'm exposed to having sex with girls and my girlfriend, I would want to know what that's like before I get married. So it just blew my mind. It didn't change me to doing it, but it blew my mind that men used to select their wives for life through the process of courting. All right, let me share with you what courting is real quick, according to, this example I find. Let me find it real quick, and then I'll let you. Here it is. So here's the differences, and I agree with most of these personally. So courting. Courting is a relationship between a man and a woman wherein they get to know each other and develop their relationship before getting married. Dating. Dating is a modern day relationship trend, a stage where the couples meet socially or regularly to see if they stand a chance to be around each other. Courtship is like a promise to make a commitment to marriage. Dating does not account for readiness of marriage with no long-term commitment. Courting preserves sexual contact for marriage only. Sexual intimacy is very common in the modern day dating culture. Courting cultivates a deep sense of emotional closeness between the couples. Dating, a form of courtship, but without the emotional part. Courting seeks accountability of parents or mentors. There is little or no accountability with family in the dating relationship. So dating is a relatively new thing for humans around the world. Dating was not a part of finding someone to marry and family. Like you said, the age of people were having sex, but if you were deciding on family, you would go into the courting process. So I do see them as different. I agree with what we just read. Your thoughts, Queen?
I honestly think that article. This is what I'm gonna tell you about how I think people be viewing things, and I hope my phone don't hang up. I think people be going too deep with stuff and making it bigger than what it is, and actually making the issue harder to resolve because all of that ain't nobody going to nobody mom and daddy these days. So we could go ahead and cut that out. But the thing is this, right? Courting and dating, you courting and dating is the same thing. The only difference is it's kind of like the thing where you was talking about maybe people trying to have casual sex or not. The only difference is the time and the effort that person put in. It don't necessarily have anything to do with sex because you could be having sex with a man and he still courts you. Courting you is that more intimate part of it or whatever, where you have that deeper connection where else everything is not all about sex, but that's still a process of dating. So trying to separate the two, I feel like separating the two is just creating an unnecessary nuance that doesn't need to be there, that is making it something much more and more complex for people to think about. It could simply be simplified as, hey, take your time getting to know someone, make sure you try and develop some type of connection, and so that the efforts that you're putting into this person, it makes sense, and it's the energy, the time, and the effort is reciprocated. All of this trying to split up dating from courting and courting from dating and what's meaningful and what's not meaningful, all that kind of stuff, it just makes it complex because I get it and I understand it, but me listening to it, it just makes my head hurt because it don't even have to be that deep. You know what I'm saying? The message is make it make sense. You know what I'm saying? Don't just be out here going willy-nilly or whatever, and actually appreciate the person who is allowing you to take up her time and actually date her. You know what I'm saying? That's all it is to me. All of that article and everything, people just complicating something that don't even have to be that deep. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's just your opinion. I actually agree with courting as so when you ask me what the difference is, it actually includes these definitions. And part of why I've even thought about it is because I always tell you, you know about this history. I became involved in a marriage group that this is what they use, and I see a lot of success. And so it was like I wanted to bring it forward as a seed for our generation, because clearly we have to admit as a hip hop generation, what we're doing absolutely is not getting it right, especially with only 29% of our community being married. Go ahead, Michelle.
I think Deja had something else to say. She unmuted. Or not? Okay. Real quick. But
you know what? When you're using the word dating and courting, and
I think your phone is breaking
that's
up.
just actually semantics at that particular point.
So you're calling it semantics because you're ruling out the definition. No, the definition, I actually believe in the definition I just read. It was clearly different. So you're calling it semantics because you're and it's fine. You can say they're the same thing, but the way I have to approach a woman, and like I said, courting cultivates a deep sense of emotional closeness between the couple. Courting preserves sexual contact for marriage only. So there are groups that are encouraging that in order to find a wife, because it has been more proven to be way more effective than what we're currently doing in our generation. So I'm for that version of finding a wife. So that is not semantics, because as it says, dating typically doesn't have a long-term contract. People can date just to see what they're doing. If you're deciding to court, you are saying, I am pursuing you with the event that I would like to marry you. I am courting to figure out whether I want to marry you or not just to see where it goes. Those are not semantics to me.
Can I go now?
Sure, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, sorry. This is another anecdotal situation, but I think it 100% applies. And I too distinguish the difference between dating and courting. We don't have a courting system or a courting structure, so we think it's the same, but it's not. So long time ago, I think it was like my first job or second job. I've always been in teams like older people, and like I like to talk to different people and like different backgrounds and stuff. So it was this older Indian lady, and we were somehow talking about relationships. I don't know how or why or whatever, but she would start talking about marriage, and sex was brought up. And she bluntly said marriage has nothing to do with sex. And then we all stopped because we're like 20 somethings, and she's like, no, marriage has nothing to do with this foolishness that you girls are talking about, because we were chit chatting. And she was talking about how she had it was like half arranged, half not arranged. It was one of those. It was like loosely arranged, so she could say yay or nay versus being forced to marry someone. So she was talking about courting, which is why this came into my brain. Where like it wasn't like a boy and a girl courted each other. It was like the families courted each other. And so when a young man, because he wasn't a boy, he was a young man, says, "I want to be with Deasia," right? Then the families have to get together. And this is not a light decision. They're going over finances, they're going over futures, they're going over education, they're going over all these attributes about what these two young people can bring to the table to see if they'll gel out. And then once the courting process begins, he's not talking to anybody else. Period. He's off the market. He's courting this young lady and showing her his best of best, right? And there's always someone else present, whether it's a mom or aunt or whoever, right? And so there's just none of that physical contact going on. It's like applying to buy a house. You just can't walk off up to somebody's house, knock on the door, and be like, "I'm going to buy your house." No, you got to go through a mortgage broker, and you got to go through this. They got to look into your finance. They got to see if you try to kidnap people and put them in your basement. It's a whole process that goes on, and that's part of the courting process. Now, and there was more to that arranged marriage thing, but marriage is about building about that family. And so when he was talking about losing focus, and then he kind of threw sex in there, but sex doesn't really have anything to do with the point of marriage. It is a business contract for two people to come together and say, we gonna be partners and we gonna build this business the way the business being the family as we see fit. And that business has an umbrella of his family and her family, and that got an umbrella of the uncles and the aunts and everything else.
Right. And so that's where I see his meme is where the meaning is. He's just pointing out we got lost just doing this. We got lost just dating, losing focus of what marriage is actually about. And it doesn't help because here's something. If we had a better concept of this, and this was part of the requirement to have a child, if that was still part of our culture, if you will, people would find themselves taking marriage more serious. But in the event where you can kind of live on your own, whether that's man or woman, and you can get as much sex as you want, a lot less focus on ever needing to get married, and you can even have children, and it's a no-brainer in our community as if it's okay. So again, it was just a dialogue to think about what this man had said and to highlight that courting is still very real, or possibly could or should be, because in my opinion, it's more effective than what we're currently doing. James, you jump back on. You got any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, I had some power outages over here in the SWAT. But yeah, basically, just go back to the old ways. Get the parents involved, and they just tell you who to marry, and that's the end of it. I know I'll be all right because my mother always talking about she wants cute grandbabies, so I know she would pick a cute girl.
I'm all about arranged marriages. So Montoya was talking about his arranged marriage group, talking about courting. So you gotta let me into that Facebook group, Montoya, and James too. You got to put James in there too.
But it's funny. My thing is, we just don't really know what marriage is anymore. It's so nebulous now. Right. Everyone has their own personal definitions and what they want. And like I always try to bring people back to the basic. And I always tell people it's a business relationship. At the end of the day, it is a merger of two businesses. And it's so funny when I hear men get mad when there's a divorce and the woman walks away with half of the man's fortune. I said, well, that's what happens in a business relationship. If you don't want that to happen, then don't get married, or better yet, be better careful in what and who you pick. And then it's funny when it happens in the reverse, and women like, "Oh, you ain't no real man. You taking her money." I'm like, "No, what's good for the goose is good for the gander." It is a business relationship, and
I,
when
I
it
I also
ends,
believe in prenuptial agreements. I wanted to throw that out there as well for the matchmaking group, Montoya.
oh yeah,
I believe in prenups.
prenups are good if you have something. That's the funny thing. People make 40,000 and say, "I need a prenup." Like, you make
So
40,000, you need a prenup.
yeah, so I'm gonna share a few thoughts from some people that I
I
follow.
think Glenn had something.
Okay, go ahead, Glenn, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that courting is still happening today, even in the African American community. It's just not that common, and there are people in different tax brackets. I'm gonna say that I've met and other people I've talked to that I've met, where after about the second or third date, they're legitimately talking like, if I'm gonna keep
Absolutely.
dating you, you need to meet my brother, my
Yeah,
uncle. Like, we need to
absolutely.
establish, like, they quickly understand that they're not going to date you for a year or two because their family's not going to let that fly, and they want to meet
Yeah.
the person.
Yeah,
And I'm
absolutely.
talking
And
people, in their early 20s, mid 20s. So
Right, right.
it still happens. It's just not that common. That's
Can
all I'm saying.
someone, I might have missed this, but can someone define for me what we mean by courtship? Because when I hear courtship, I think of Victorian England. So what exactly are we talking
So
about?
yeah,
Montoya has a whole
we
script.
did
Yeah.
define it. I'm gonna make it real quick, just because I know you got knocked off. So
Thank you.
I'll just give you a shorter version of what I shared earlier. Now I gotta find it again. I thought I had it pulled up already.
Can I hop in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
The same Indian lady that we were talking about, she said that you don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, but boyfriend until you meet his mother. So don't fall for the okie doke. That is her words
That's funny.
verbatim. Old Indian lady saying, "Don't fall for the okie doke. You're not dating him until you meet his mother." So to Glenn's point.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a show. I think, matter of fact, the agent was on this show. She had jumped back on. Let me get it back on here. We did a show. I think you will love this show, Michelle, on Mental Dialogue, where I said why I would not let my daughter have a boyfriend, and it's highly related around what you just said. And so me and the agent fought like cats and dogs before she finally understood what I was saying. But so I definitely would recommend watching that show. But let me answer James' question real quick. Let me find this again. I was on it. Oh, here it is. I'm just going to give you a short version. It says courting is a relationship between a man and a woman where they get to know each other and develop their relationship before getting married. And the definition of dating, James, was dating is a modern day relationship trend, a stage when the couples meet socially or regularly to see if they stand a chance to be around each other. I'll give one more thing. Courtship is like a promise to make a commitment to marriage. Dating does not account for readiness of marriage with no long-term commitment. So there were some other definitions we shared as well, but that's to give you at least a semblance of the difference versus thinking all the way back to what you said, Victoria, England, if you will. Let me give a little history too. That's pretty cool. That I've learned some, just to highlight this. I'm not going to keep the show going too much longer, but I want to give a little history to show you how economics in the marketplace changed so much of what we see now, and how while we think of and talk about courting, like Michelle talked about, where they're like, for example, most people don't know this, 60% of the marriages around the world are still arranged. And some people, and without thinking of the extreme situations, they're definitely the extreme ones where the women have no say so, but those are still not the majority of arranged marriages, just to highlight this out. But the biggest difference, like even in American culture to a degree, while we didn't use arranged marriage, for the most part, it was still the same concept that you shared earlier, Michelle, where two families are coming together. So there was always a big part of the process. We clearly know the history that we will learn in America about the kings and the queens that are coming together we talked about this on the show Saturday, where we talked about Is Marriage Dead? So we talked about the history of the ruling class constantly using marriage, similar to what James said. Oh, yeah, the Asia's back on. similar to what James said, as some type of business arrangement, right? So we know about the major royal families using it for this way. But what's typically not thought about is even the common man, common people, if you will, still had some concept of that. They didn't have much, if you will, but they still were bringing together what resources they had. And so what happened is, while the world, for the most part, became agricultural at one point, right? For a long period of time, humans were trading land, farming land. And so what would happen is, typically, let's say you and Michelle, you and I will just use all of us as an example. Let's say you and I were married. James is the oldest, and Deasia is our daughter, and she's or whatever. So what happens is, if you and I are married and we have a plot of land, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the entire world was have and have-nots. There was no middle class. And so if we were married and had a plot of land, and we were trying to have 10 children because we want to help them work our land. Well, if James is the oldest, as long as he stays in our good graces, he's set to get the land or a decent plot of land, because it's not like there's a bunch of more land to go around. It's not like we all have money just to James to go out and get land. He would be reliant on the land you and I've, gotten. He's helping us farm it. And so when he gets married, we will want approval of who he's marrying, because we're going to pass this down. And in the event that you or I die, he's responsible for making sure Deasia and the rest of the siblings are given plots of land as they are, in a sense. So we didn't quote unquote arrange marriages, but you definitely had to get approval to ensure.
Yeah, you got to vet it. You got to vet who's going to have your inheritance.
Right. So it still got done inherently based on the market. And if James, as the oldest, fell out of favor, the first thing he would get threatened with is, if you don't want to act right, we're not going to put you in the inheritance. And so a lot of times that would get him in line. So I'm just bringing out that history, that once we move from agricultural to an industrialized revolution, which obviously allowed women to get other jobs and other things in the marketplace, they wasn't as reliant on the man to make it. Not only did the women, in a sense, be able to get out into the marketplace, but even men, the sons of the families, are no longer dependent on their family for wealth. They're not dependent for a plot of land. So,
and I would like to interject, because you know me, I always like to stir the pot. This is mostly speaking from a Eurocentric standpoint and Western standpoint, and so I can
not
make
true.
it with.
Not true. Go ahead.
Generally speaking,
no, not even close.
The reason I was getting ready to say that is because I wanted to upset the women. I want to go back to our issue with polygamy. And I was saying we could do it like West Africa, and we just get a bunch of women to work the land, and the man stay at home as the king and defend the castle. So that's what we need to do. We need to go back to that.
That's not how polygamy works. I know a few polygamists. That's not how that works at all. They're very upset with you right now.
Pre-colonial Africa.
Pre-colonial. But the thing is, it's like, at some point it becomes, for me, sometimes when we go all the way in history of what other people used to do and all of that or whatever, I think we do ourselves a disservice and we start having aimless chit chat, because we don't live in those societies. That's not our culture. We don't live in those societies. We're not we're not way back in the 1900s. So for me, it's like it's good to know information, but it's like, what can I do with this type of information? We're not gonna go back there, and we're not gonna start doing it that way. I think we need to start having more progressive conversations that is giving people ideas of what to do now, because all of this stuff that's being named, trying to separate dating from courting and all that kind of stuff, I don't feel like that's gonna help anybody be able to move forward and change anything in our generation. We live in a technology driven generation. You could get on the phone, you can swipe to the left, you know what I'm saying? You could swipe to the left and find you somebody, like Michelle was saying about ordering the pizza or whatever. So we have to come up to speed. We have to come up to speed with where people are at now.
Okay, I'll bring it back to modern times, and I'll basically say what my dad told me. And it's funny, but it's very pragmatic. He says, son, don't do like I did. He says, I was young, I was dumb, I went out and had a bunch of kids by different women, and now I don't have anything because I'm paying child support for these different children. And then what I do have left goes to your mother and your sister because he was married to my mom at the time. He says, you find you a woman you can tolerate. And I emphasize the word tolerate. He didn't even say love. He said, because there's going to be some times you aren't feeling too lovey-dovey. You're not necessarily in love. Find you a woman you can tolerate, someone that is able and willing to build with you. You get with that woman and you stick with that woman and you make it work. You have all the children you want with this one woman. And when you and her decide you don't want any more children, you go and you get a snip. You snip it up and you don't have any more children with any more women. And if for whatever reason it does not work out, I was like, well, what if it don't work out? You give another woman and she wants children. He says that ain't the woman for you. You keep on searching. But that is the most pragmatic thing I could say for our society because we always get away from the business and the financials when it comes to marriage. Every time you talk to people about marriage, the first thing comes up, I love him. I love her. No one ever says, well, how do you pay the mortgage? How do you raise the children? How do you afford the car? What happens with the 401k? My relatives that have been married and have been married for a long time were not necessarily in love. I have an aunt, I'm not mentioning her name, but because I have a bunch of aunts. If her husband had lived, they would have been married over 50 something years. And he was not the nicest guy. And I was asking her, I said, well, what happened? How did you do it? She said when she was growing up, they didn't have that much money. She was poor. He had a good amount of money, or he was basically enough money. He basically told her grandmother back to that courting thing, if you give her to me, I will make sure she never knows hunger. She never knows homelessness. She never knows want. They got married, and she said she made a promise to the Lord. If I don't have to worry about where my bills are coming from, my clothes and stuff, I'll make it work. Again, he wasn't the nicest person. Some people might even say they may have had a dysfunctional marriage, but she outlived him. She got like 3 houses out of the man.
Well,
She's
thank you
still
so
living.
much, brother. I want to let Shadon jump on. She just
No,
jumped on.
I'm sorry.
So that's all good. I'll just highlight this real quick and go to Shadon. I think there's still pragmatism as he used. I'll just use that word, Deasia, in which we can interject into our current conversation to try to figure out what we can do. So it almost like keep the meat, spit out the bone type situations is kind of how I look at some of what we're talking about. Go ahead, Shadon. Come, you're live with us. Go ahead, Queen.
Oh, well, good evening. Oh, I just jumped in because I hadn't, kicked it with y'all in a long time. And I'm at the airport, so I won't talk long. But what I will say is we don't operate in balance, right? We operate in extremes. So to say be in a relationship with somebody just because they can afford you, the life that you desire with no love whatsoever, or to say that you should be in a relationship solely for love. Neither of them make sense. We have to operate in balance. You need to find someone that you enjoy sharing space with. Love lends to you enjoying sharing space with them. And if you enjoy sharing space with them, eventually you guys will realize to maintain this joy, this love, this space, and continue to grow it, you guys need to work collectively to make sure that you have the resources, the means that you need to pass that on. And because you enjoy what you've built, you're going to want to make sure that you continue to build that or leave that legacy behind for your children by living by example, and then it will carry on and on and on. But to tell specifically a woman, but anybody, to just be in relationship with somebody because they can buy you a nice house, they're not nice, they mistreat you, they don't show you any type of love or affection, you feel less than, you excited at their funeral, like who does that?
I love the
Well,
thought.
that's
Just
what they
find
did
out.
back in the day.
Let me say this. I love the thought, Shadon, and I always say this, and I think it kind of speaks to the age. I think this speaks to some of what you're saying. Shadon, you've heard me say this a million times. The answer is always in the middle, And so I hear that's kind of what you're bringing to the table. And I agree 100%, because the one thing that I would highlight for, as even as James highlighted, is he just kind of mentioned back in the day. And so what you're done to me, DeAsia, is keeping the meat, spitting out the bone, because 100%, I always say you cannot put the milk back in the jug. And so we did a show on Saturday that says, is marriage dead? And we highlighted how marriage has changed to include love in a way that it didn't just really 70 years ago, but if you want to be accurate, about 250 years ago, love wasn't even a part of it, right? But we were just pointing out the difference in the change. And the one thing that they said on that show when they gave up the history was saying, hey, navigating marriage with this love concept is actually new age and a new thing. So I think Shadon hit the nail on the head in the sense that it would have to be a balance. The answer is in the middle, where you consider some of the pragmatism, which I think is lost on our culture today because we haven't seen it by example. However, it can never go back to just back in today, like Shadon said, where somebody's saying, oh, you can afford me, or you can look out for me. It can never, like, I agree with you, DeAsia, we can never go backwards. So the dialogue is to find some of that balance. I think that Shadon speaks to. DeAsia, I would love to hear your response to that. And I'm pretty much going to let all of y'all give one last response, and we're out of here.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. I think for me, what I look at is the audience. Like, who are we talking to when we're having these conversations? Who are we trying to reach? Are we preaching to the choir, or are we trying to reach the generations to come? So for me, when I hear certain things, it makes sense. But also I take into consideration where this generation is actually at, how they process information, how they develop relationships with each other and everything. So a lot of the practical stuff that we discussed, that we've seen before in our lifetime and we saw happen, they don't even have any of these examples. They don't even have those anecdotal experiences for them to even speak in a way that we're able to speak and say, hey, I remember I saw this growing up and this, that, and the third. They don't have those same type of experiences that we had coming up. So for me, I just look at it as it needs to be put out there in a way to help the generation to come. Because if you're talking to 35, 36-year-old people and higher about it, is at that point, they just need to get their shit together. You know what I'm saying? But because we done seen it. But if you're talking to the younger generation, it's just all of the history and things like that. I don't feel like that's gonna help them. I don't feel like now I'm gonna tell you something. The best example to me that has been made as far as making it make sense for the generation now and generation to come is the example that I think Keon or James, he said his daddy told him. That's easier to digest than, talking about what happened during the Industrial Revolution and the agricultural time and things like that.
So let me say this, I'm going to go to Michelle. So I'm just going to say this very briefly. Again, I just added on the history for the sake of the conversation. So I absolutely did not say bring that in for the next generation. What James said is the messaging that and he's been with me long enough, that we're constantly giving to young men who tell us below 30 that they are afraid of marriage. They don't even know what it's like. So we're constantly giving the message that James is giving to them. I would highlight that even for us at 35 and up, if you will, sometimes we can hear a seed that we can kind of now give to the next generation who's going to be more lost without examples. So it's kind of like if we can become aware of our own, kind of like his father did for him, if you can become aware of your own failings, you can be smarter about what you're saying to the next generation. So some of the dialogue is to our age with hope that you pick up a seed to give your children, but we're absolutely saying what James said to these young men. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I'm a proponent of courtship and arranged marriages. My son is 6, but he already has 2 potential wives. I'm working on it. like real talk. Like I really like me and my friends. We sit down, we look at our kids. We say, okay, he go to Woodward, she goes to Westminster. We gonna make this work, right? So I'm a proponent of courtship and arranged marriages. I really wish I would have had the upbringing and parental information. I wish I didn't grow up with, oh, it's just sex as a part of my 12-year-old vocabulary. Um, and I wish things were different, but they weren't, right? And so, like you just said, the only thing we could do is teach the next generation something better.
Shadon, last thought for the night. Thank you for jumping on with us, Queen.
Oh yeah, I would just say that I would hope that moving forward we focus on giving current examples of successful marriages to the youth. I think that there is a overflow of relationship experts and panels around relationships and how to find the perfect mate, and they're all people who have not done it, or have attempted and failed. And it's okay to attempt and fail, but then you should learn from those failures so that you can in turn do it successfully. I'm talking about people who have attempted, failed, and never tried again and have no examples of success. So if I would say if you don't have the immediate experience, I'm not saying that you can't give feedback, but then guide them to some real life examples that they can see and know that it is possible in today's time. We're so often putting kids back to say, well, yeah, my great great grandmama and I want to be in this long term relationship because my granddad and granddaddy, grandmama was together for 70 years, but she hated him and he hated her. Like, that ain't what we want. So,
Amen.
you always say that I created my own little world, and I did, and I love it. I don't operate in, what society has told us to do and what that should look like. And my husband and I have been together for 16 years and married for 11 successfully. I can tell you last time we had an argument about something because we do what works for us and we know that it works for us. So that's my last little tidbit.
No, I love it. I know you used to call in pretty regular. I will highlight just to point what you said, and it's funny that you said that because that's literally a show that I'm trying to line up. But the last show where we did some of what you're similar with, this brother by the name Vaughn the Alchemist, excellent. Him and his wife been married 30 years, and we did a show of why are there so many damn relationship coaches, and they highlighted the very thing that you're talking about. And I literally, D'Amico, so I'll just highlight this real quick because I don't know if he's watching. But D'Amico's, I literally just hit him last night, this morning, because he put up a beautiful post of asking to do what you just said. He said, women, can you talk about how marriage, if you're married, how marriage has benefited you and how you've shown growth. And I literally went on this post and said, I'm going to turn this into an entire show, which is current examples talking about how they've gotten it right. So that is actually a future mental dialogue show. I don't know if I'll do it on here, but just to let you know, that is absolutely something I decided this morning. So it's a dope way to end this whole concept because you're absolutely right. We need current examples. And I always say this, speaking to marriage positively, because unfortunately on social media, you're going to see too much negative associated with the word marriage. So I'm not surprised when I meet young men, 22, that in their mind, they don't ever want to be married because all they've ever heard is negative words or negative things around the word marriage. And like to your point, Shadon, they're only hearing about old examples. So I love that point. Thank y'all for jumping on again. We just do this to raise the culture. Hopefully we all learn something from one another and we can take it and use it and spread the word. But thank y'all. We'll look to do this. Hopefully I'll be on next week. We're doing something like this, but I appreciate all of you for coming on. Good night.
Add me to your secret arranged marriage group.
I'll reach out and try to get you added.
All right.